Welcome to the Coach Toolbox. This podcast is for coaches, leaders, and learners at all levels in organizations and in all walks of life. Here, you will get just-in-time learning that is research-based and practice-focused. The goal is personal and professional mastery. And now, our session today. So, a warm welcome to our listeners and a warm welcome to our guest, Dr. Jayasimha Balakrishna. I am just so happy to have him on our show today, and he's going to talk to us today about deciphering the need for emotional intelligence. Now, BK, as we all call him fondly, has an amazing track record in terms of experience and expertise. He's had a long career starting from hospitality industry, then in learning and development, and over the last few years, he has developed a particular expertise in emotional intelligence, in breath work, energy management, birth work, and he's also a yoga coach. So he brings this amazing perspective to the conversation of emotional intelligence. He's an author, speaker, expert, trainer on this subject. So we are just so happy to have you with us. So welcome, BK.
Thank you, Ajay. It's wonderful being with you. Of course, we all know that we go a long way back, and my training career started with you. So it's always wonderful to be with you. Thanks, Ajay. Thanks once again.
Yeah, so I've also had the opportunity to work with BK, and just an amazing human being. BK, anything you'd like to add to highlight anything about your journey that I've missed out?
Well, Ajay, I think you know my journey. Nothing that you've missed out except that we've had the roller coaster rides in our lives, and going through these roller coaster rides is also what kind of influenced me into writing and practicing emotional intelligence in my personal life. And that I guess gives a little bit more credibility to what I'm writing, and because we did practice certain things when we were going through tough times in 2015, as you know. So the genesis for this book started in 2015.
All right. And so the book BK is talking about is called Deciphering the Need for Emotional Intelligence, and it's going to be released in the next few days, in about a week or so. And the good news is for listeners of this podcast, BK's LinkedIn profile, I'll also put his email ID in the description. If you're interested in the talk and in getting a copy of this book, if you send him a quick email, he has promised that he will give a 50% discount. Listeners of this podcast will be eligible to a 50% discount as soon as his book is released in the coming week or so. So that's excellent, BK. So let's get started. You mentioned it, but tell us a little bit more about what led you to write this book, Deciphering the Need for Emotional Intelligence.
It was in the year 2015, Ajay, when, as they say, life can change in the blink of an eye, when my wife was diagnosed with cancer. Totally unpredictable, she had no genetic factors. There were she was a non-smoker, non-drinker. She never ate non-vegetarian in her life, but she just landed up with, I don't know. And by the time we detected it, it was already in the 4th stage. So it was more a journey of taking care of her as long as she lives. And she got lung cancer, so which had spread and metastasized. So it was during that time that, as a family, I took it upon myself to see whether what we actually talk works in situations like this. And to a large extent, I should say that this worked. Yes, the elements of emotional intelligence, as we call it, are taking something out of what is emotional intelligence all about and putting it into practice in our lives. Yes, it did help us during that time. Once she moved on, in the first 3 or 4 months, I thought it prudent that I write something about what happened with us and how we applied some of the elements of emotional intelligence and how it worked. So this is the detailed kind of the basis for writing this book.
How deep that is, and for if you perhaps missed it, BK had a beautiful wife, and he lost her in 2015.
2016.
16,
yeah.
and this book and its application of emotional intelligence at a personal level, at his family level, sort of comes out of the pain and the journey of losing someone who is so close and dear to us. So I think for many of us who may have also gone through similar transitions in life, I think this would be a very, very important message, because the author knows what he's talking about. So BK, thank you for that. We've heard this term emotional intelligence quite a lot. Just, bring us on the same page and tell us, what is emotional intelligence?
Ajay, to be very honest with you, any and every situation that we deal with has an emotional undercurrent. There's no denying that fact. Today, what is happening in the corporate world is we are looking at cold numbers. We are looking at being rational. We are looking at being practical. And in fact, we are told don't be emotional. But emotions are something we cannot just do away with. And the more we ignore it, the more it takes on a, what do you say, a volcanic proportion. Because emotion for me is energy in motion. So emotion is all about energy. And there is no way, we all know physics, there is no way we can suppress energy. So the more we try to suppress emotions, the more we try to deny emotions, the greater harm it can cause us. So when we're talking about emotional intelligence, it's not, emotions has got a, what do you call, a kind of dysfunctional meaning to it, if I can. So, which means that they need to be disputed, they need to be discarded, they need to be ignored. These are some of the terminology that we use in trying to suppress emotions. And that's gross injustice that you're doing to the other person as well as yourself. So when we talk of emotional intelligence, it's building up an awareness. It's building up an awareness of yourself, the other person, what are the elements. In fact, emotional intelligence in my psychometric has got about 15 competencies that we deal with. Once we go through each of these 15 competencies, it gives us an in-depth knowledge on how we can channel these emotions, instead of discarding them. So understanding that there is an emotional undercurrent in anything that we do is prime. And what can we do with that is the next step. And that's where the application of emotional intelligence comes in.
All right. So what you're saying really is that emotions is good because it's energy in motion. There is some amount of misunderstanding around it that, okay, at the workplace, there is no place for emotions, but that's not a functional, that's not a healthy understanding, because if people try to do that, it just gets suppressed and it's going to burst and blow over at any point in time.
Exactly, Ajay.
So let's talk about in terms of the workplace. So what is the importance, what is the application of emotional intelligence at the workplace?
Well, at the workplace, it's now imperative that we're working as a part of a team, right? And the pressures of work are such nowadays that we are not giving enough attention to the person. We're only giving enough attention to the work that the person is doing. We need to remember that human beings are first emotional and then rational. And how many of us actually spend that moment to just understand what that person might be going through emotionally? A star performer certainly starts underperforming. And we find any and every reason other than what he might be going through emotionally to blame his lack of performance suddenly. In one of the meetings that I was with a corporate L&D head, he was talking about how there was this staff performer woman who was there in the team, excellent performer, and suddenly they started noticing a huge drop in her work. So the usual reasons are given. Oh, maybe she is not interested. Maybe she's looking for a different job. All those things that we kind of stereotype in terms of our answers to find answers to our questions. Well, that's what happened. And then when that manager got down to sit with that person and, just ask her what's the reason was completely different. She had just separated from her husband, and then, she had to drop the kids, pick up the kids, do all that extra thing which came onto her. And that was the reason she was falling behind at work. So recognizing that emotional situation, what's happening to that person in her life or his life or my life is paramount. And it doesn't take much time. We think that spending time personally is a waste of time. No. In fact, spending that, just that, getting that deeper connect with that person helps a lot, right? We have become very transactional in our interactions in companies. I don't blame the manager or the leader or whoever, because today there's such a big churn in teams. We hardly have people or members staying in teams for more than 3, 6 months, maximum to a year, right? So the question in my mind is, why should I spend time? Why should I invest time in trying to get to know a person as long as that person is doing the job? And over a period of time, it starts draining that person, because we all need that energy, an appreciative energy, an inquiry energy. It just helps. It just builds that connect, but we've just ignored it, right?
Yeah.
So when we are working with teams, when we are in teams, when we are in a social environment, be it professional or personal, it's important to connect.
And you said, I've written it down this way, that person plus work is equal to performance. So
Absolutely.
many times we just think work is equal to performance, but and person brings emotions into the picture, right? And it's also a function of what's happening in their lives outside the office. All these things get integrated into performance at work. But like you said, we tend to look at everything very transactional way.
Yeah. Yes,
All right.
absolutely.
How else would emotional intelligence play and be useful in the workplace, especially in between relations, between team members?
When we're talking about the competencies of emotional intelligence, the prime competency is self-awareness. Now, when I am self-aware, I am able to understand my strengths as well as my weaknesses. Once I do that, I'm able to recognize that in the other. So that builds up an awareness of the other person. Now, once I have this information with me, I do not deal with that person transactionally anymore. His strength might be somewhere else than in the line that he is in right now. Am I able to recognize that? So building up a self-awareness and building up an awareness of the others, for me, two critical components of emotional intelligence. Now, once I do that, my interpersonal relationships with people is definitely on a different platform. I'm able to empathize, which is another factor of emotional intelligence. Then I'm able to build resilience in the person, because all of us know in our everyday life in corporates, we go through a roller coaster of emotions in terms of performance, in terms of deliverables, in terms of revised deadlines, the whole thing. So when I'm connected, when I'm aware, and when there is empathy and I build that resilience within the team, it is a performing team. It is a performing team. So understanding what self-awareness is, understanding the other person, practicing empathy. When I say practicing empathy, I move it from empathy into compassion. Empathy in action is compassion. If I'm able to use these, because again, we're talking about energy in action, energy in motion. So it might be good that I'm empathizing, but how am I putting that empathy into action in my team? And there is no denying that there is a time investment in all this. As a leader, as a manager, I need to invest that time in my team. So that becomes very, very important. So I guess that answers the question that you asked.
So true. And you raised such an important point that this is not magic. A manager and every team member has to make the investment in these skills and these competencies on an ongoing basis, right?
Absolutely. It's a daily ritual, if you ask me.
So how can emotional intelligence help us cope more effectively with this change and complexity that always seems to be part of our life?
Well, the only stability, if you ask me, is instability. So the factors of emotional intelligence help us cope with change and complexity. If you see, there was a time in our lives when there was this fast-paced change, especially with the advent of information technology in the late 90s and early 2000s, right? So people were busy coping with that. Now, not only that, we've got complexity into our job structures. We've got it's becoming more and more complex. I'll just give you an example. If you take a car, I own a vintage car, which is 1935, which is just a basic, internal combustion engine, very simple mechanism.
Yeah.
It was easy to drive, etc. But today you take a new model car, there are about 32 electronically controlled units. It's become complex, but the internal combustion engine has not changed, right?
Yeah.
So how am I? And there is always a need to give more because people want more. Not only do they want more, they want quality and they want it faster. Because we live in an environment, or we live in a world where there is instant possibility. So I'm trying to bring that into the workspace. All right. Okay. So that is leading to a lot of stress. As a human being, I'm not able to function at the pace of information technology. That is something that we need to understand. What is happening is, if I understand the elements of sharing what are you being emotionally honest in terms of what is happening with you? Today, we don't share information, right? Now, if me as a leader, I'm not able to tell my junior in terms of why he is doing the work that he's doing, how will that person be able to contribute? Research today says 75% of the leaders, 75% of the workforce don't even know what job they're doing. If they don't know, how are they going to contribute? And if they don't contribute, I'm under constant stress in this change and complex world because I'm not able to deliver what my management has asked. So it's a change. It's a change. It starts right from the bottom, goes all the way up to the top. So am I being emotionally honest on what is required of the person? Am I building that resilience? Like you said, we're talking about that emotional roller coaster, right, that we go through every day in the office. Why is that happening? Because there is some information cut out from people from where it originates to where it reaches. So there's a big gap. So this change in complexity is not transferred down. So I really don't know right at the bottom what is expected of me. So that is creating that ripple effect. Developing that emotional connect with the team, bonding with the team, spending quality time with people becomes all the more important, to handle, because I can't handle it by myself. I need my team. I need people.
Yeah. And you've given some aspects, it seems, of how our listeners can start building emotional intelligence at their level, and I would assume then at the level of their teams. Speak to this a little bit. How can our listeners start building emotional intelligence at the personal level?
Well, Ajay, if you're looking at it from the personal level, I think first is an inquiry mode. You need to get into the inquiry mode in terms of what's happening with you. For that, we all know psychometrics help a lot, right? Unfortunately, today, psychometrics, I guess it's changing now, but at least initially when we started with emotional intelligence psychometrics, they thought it's a test. It's trying to tell them you're good at this, you're not good at this. But then there is a changing perspective today saying that, okay, a psychometric indicates who you are and there's nothing wrong with who you are. That's just me. So if I can build on that, recognize my strengths, recognize my weaknesses, and get to know that, do a self-analysis, that is the starting place. Okay. I can use that information as a trickle-down effect to members in my team. Recognize their strengths, recognize their weaknesses. I've had some workshops where top leaders have sat in them and done these self-awareness assessments or the EI assessment, and then have said, all right, let's take it down to the team and then see what people's strengths are, and then allocate work accordingly. I've had people who've done that. And there's been a transformation in performance. It begins with me. And when it begins with me, I need to have that acceptance that I need to know a little bit more about myself. I can't be like that bull in the China shop. Not taking any feedback, nothing. Can't be my way or the highway anymore. I tell all my readers who are reading the book to first do that psychometric. I wouldn't call it a psychometric. I would just call it a self-analysis, because psychometric is much deeper, as we all know. So do a self-analysis and then start reading the book.
Excellent.
Right.
So there is a book and there are tools available. If you're really more interested, for our listeners who are more interested, there is an easy place to start with the awareness exercise in BK's book. And then if you really want to take it down to your team level, you can get BK's help in using this to work with your team. So one of the interesting things that you cover in your book is you talk about spirituality. Mm-hmm. And that is something, once again, is very taboo to talk spirituality. So tell us a little bit more about that, how it relates to us in the workplace.
That's a very interesting aspect of emotional intelligence, right? Most of the time we mistake spirituality with religion. Religion, if you ask me, is all about do's and don'ts. Spirituality for me is what works and what doesn't. So when we're talking about spirituality, what am I saying? I'm talking about love, compassion, and truth. And it's got nothing to do with do's and don'ts, right? When we're talking about spirituality, it's about including people, not separating people. And inclusion happens how? When I build my self-awareness, when I build my awareness of others, when I'm empathetic, when I become compassionate, when I develop my interpersonal relationships, when I build resilience, right? So I need to be capable of digging out that muck of the other person to discover that goal, right? And how can I do that? I can do that only if I include that person, not exclude. So when I'm talking about spirituality, I'm talking about going into the core of being, going into your own self and discovering your core. Who are you? What is it? You are part of the whole system, of the whole universe, or are you an individual island of excellence? I can only work so much if I'm in that individual mode. I work in silos simply because of this in our world today.
So what you're saying is that individual development, looking at developing love, compassion, and truth. But what you're saying is, if as an individual leader, I can develop this, understand this for myself, for my people, then it helps me connect at a very deep level, at that one nugget of gold level. And then therefore connection at that level would have a dramatic impact at the person to person connect, and therefore work, and therefore performance. So it's all linked to leadership performance, to team performance.
As a leader today, I'm not spending so much of time with technology as I'm spending time with human emotion. One of the best indicators for performance as leaders is we need to look at sports teams and people who have led successful sport teams. If you look at their leaders, they always have had this. They've been compassionate. They've understood the other person. They've tried to discover the goal in the other person. You look, India cricket religion, right? So you look at some of the captains of the Indian team. You take a Mahendra Singh Dhoni or you take a Sourav Ganguly initially. These were people who backed people. They discovered their inner strengths. They discovered those players' inner strengths. They were willing to spend time with them. They were willing to give them chances. Today, we don't have time to give people chances because we are consumed by that work pressure. Because once we connect at that level with a person, he or she is willing to do anything for me as a leader.
First of all, developing that connection at a human level, and then the performance sort of follows, or it becomes so much easier. And I think many of us would be able to relate to the analogy of the sport.
It's edge to edge. Human to human.
Human to human, no longer B2B, but human to human.
Pressure on performance. It's breaking down people. Stress is a part of our lives. Not getting rid of the anxiety, but recognizing that anxiety and saying, instead of saying, I don't want to be under stress, if you're just able to say, I will deal with stress, it can bring about quite a big difference.
How are renewal mechanism linked to emotional intelligence? Just make that link for me because I seem to have lost it.
So when we are talking about mindfulness, when I'm mindful, I'm looking at all the competencies of emotional intelligence. I'm willing to spend time with people. So I'm more self-aware in what I'm saying. I am more able to recognize what the other person might be feeling. Thereby, I'm able to address the core issue that the other person might be facing. When I'm able to handle that, the other person gets a sense of, yes, I belong to this group, I belong to this team, I belong here. So when I'm establishing all that simply because I'm mindful, there is an automatic connect. Now, at the same time, emotional intelligence is not about being hunky-dory all the time. Whatever has to be said at that point of time. But being mindful and spending time with the person and establishing that deeper connect, I've built up a good emotional bank balance with him from which I'm able to withdraw. Unfortunately, we withdraw more than we deposit nowadays.
So true. And within the team context, within the workplace context, just imagine a leader who is working with a team of people from which are all overdrawn relationship accounts and then expecting performance. Just doesn't make sense.
Yes.
Well, BK, we are coming close to the end of our conversation for the time that we had set. So in closing, what are some key messages that you'd like to share with our listeners to make them more aware about the power of emotional intelligence in
whatever
their
I have said so far, Ajay, in summary, my message would be for people to first start looking at becoming self-aware. Most of us are not even aware of our own selves. Now, once I'm able to recognize that, then I can become aware of the other person. It can happen even in personal relationships, because we carry a lot of emotional baggage. We carry baggage with us, and that directly or indirectly helps relationships, be it professional or personal. That's the first thing. The second thing, to develop emotional intelligence, I need patience. Patience is something that I have completely lost out as an individual in this fast-paced world. Okay, now lack of patience leads to anxiety. And anxiety is nothing but a form of stress. Okay, now that stressfulness over a period of time, repetitive stress is what's going to kill my body. Right? So there is a link to all this. And this book provides a platform in terms of how I can link these personal issues or these professional issues by simply becoming mindful, as you said, becoming conscious of what's happening around me. And all this is from a result of, I just want to make a difference, not only to myself, but whoever comes across to me, with me in my life.
So your book is going to be released in the next week or so, Deciphering the Need for Emotional Intelligence. And for our listeners, just to remind you that I'll be putting BK's LinkedIn profile link and his email ID in the description to this episode. If you'd like to connect with him, get a copy of the book, get a 50% discount on the book, just send him a quick message so that offer will be available to you as listeners of this podcast. And if you'd like to connect with BK and use either his services as a coach for something that you may be going through at a personal level, or you would like to look at some of the things that he had spoken about in terms of making your team and your workplace more emotionally intelligent, then I encourage you to get in touch with him and connect with him through his email ID. So thank you so much, BK, for spending time with us, for sharing your knowledge and experience and expertise. It's just been
same here, Ajay. Always a pleasure working with you and, just talking to you. Yeah, you've been so a part of my life ever since I started training and got into it. It's always wonderful to be with you, Ajay.
And that's it for today. Thank you for listening. Please connect with us on coachtoolbox@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to follow, subscribe, and review this channel. Details of our ICF-approved coach training programs and our services as executive coaches and coaching supervisors are on www.globalcoachtrust.org. See you in our next session.